Hey there, future Airbnb host. Ready to turn that spare room or whatever you got into some extra income? Well, this video is for you. We're going to be talking all about Airbnb income, and we're also going to be talking about some of the dangers of Airbnb, especially when it comes to finance and lending within the Australian market and how the banks actually look at lending for Airbnb. But stick around, I'm going to show you how to turn Airbnb into a profitable side hustle, which the banks will actually look at and say yes to. So if this is of interest for you, enjoy. If you're new here, my name is Edwena Dixon. I'm a mortgage and finance broker here in Australia. We operate Australia-wide. I've been a mortgage broker for over a decade now, and before that, I worked at the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute with mathematicians at the University of Melbourne. So I've been around numbers and number people for a very long time. I'm here to help you to understand numbers, break it all down, and actually be able to live a healthier, wealthier life that you're going to enjoy. So let's dive in. If you don't know what Airbnb is, let me give you a really quick overview. It's short-term stay, somewhere between staying at somebody's house and staying at a hotel. But it's specifically done by people using generally their own home or an investment property. It's often called short-term rental. So it's where you might go and you might book to stay at a Airbnb place via their app, and you might only stay for a couple of days or you might stay for a week. You're not renting the place for 12 months like a usual rental property. It's usually fully furnished, and there are a bunch of other websites like Stays and other ones that do similar things, but ultimately it's short-term rental, and most of the time people use it instead of a hotel. What are the different types of Airbnbs that you can actually rent out? Well, you can rent out a single room. If you have a spare room at your house, you can rent that out. If you've got an apartment, you can rent the whole thing out. If you've got a house, you can rent all of that out. If you've got a granny flat or a bungalow out the back of your house, so not even attached to your house, but completely separate, also on your own block of land, you can rent that out as well. Or you might have an entire investment property that perhaps isn't necessarily performing well as a standard investment property, in which case Airbnb might be a really great option for you. So who looks after a Airbnb? Well, with Airbnb, you're actually the one that looks after them a little bit more than perhaps a property manager. So a property manager looks after your investment property. They look after the tenant, they answer all their questions, they help them with any maintenance requests. With an Airbnb though, that's you. You can get an Airbnb property manager if you'd like, but often what people do is they do it themselves. So when a guest comes, they'll book in, then they'll leave. You're the one that actually washes all the sheets. You're the one that might clean the toilet. You're the one that does all of those things that generally a cleaner does at a hotel. You're the person that does that in this situation. So let's say that you have a Airbnb and it does really well. How much are you actually going to make above what a standard investment property is going to do? Well, one of the unique things about Airbnb or short-term holiday rental is that you actually will earn a lot more income, but it's inconsistent. So you don't know for how long or how frequent people are going to come and stay. But the flip side is that you're often earning 2 or 3 times, perhaps more, what you would get if it was a standard investment property. So what are some of the costs that you should expect with an Airbnb? Well, there are a few big costs that you really have to factor in initially when you first get an Airbnb. The biggest one being furniture. Because with a short-term rental, it's expected that there is going to be a bed, a couch, there's going to be linen there, towels, all these types of things, which cost you money upfront. You need to have those put in place before you can then actually rent the property out on Airbnb or Stays. Some of the other costs that you then have to factor in are the standard things like electricity, gas, water. But some of the additional costs that you'll have to cover as part of Airbnb management is the cost of actually getting taken out by Airbnb to rent it out on their platform. That's on their website. They will take additional fees every time it gets booked out. Then you've got advertising. You might actually decide that you want to put advertising behind it so people actually even know it exists. Putting it onto the website itself might be great, but it's going to take a little while to get traction and for people to know that it even exists. So you might want to put some advertising behind it. Some people actually even create their own little website for their place, or they might create an Instagram profile for the property. So there's a lot of different ways that you can attract attention for your Airbnb property, especially if there's something really unique about it, which will be enticing for somebody to want to stay. Then you also have things like all the laundering. Actually, the cost of laundering all of the towels, all of the bed linens, that costs money. So you might decide that it's a better option to actually hire bedding, towels, so that somebody else is actually the one that's looking after actually getting all of those washed, making sure they're all nice and clean. Any stains that are on them are gone. That might be a better option for you. So again, there are more costs associated with the ongoing maintenance of an Airbnb as opposed to a standard rental property. One of the other costs that people often forget about with an Airbnb is insurance. Now, with a standard investment property, you would have building insurance, but with an Airbnb property, it's a different type of insurance. You also want to make sure that you can get insurance. We've all heard horror stories of where, a bunch of teens have booked an Airbnb and then they've completely trashed the place. Now, if this happens to you, you want to make sure that any insurance that you've got, you can actually get holes in the walls repaired, that you're going to be able to have all of those things fixed. Again, Airbnb insurance, it's a bit different. It's a bit more expensive because we just don't know. There's so many people coming through all the time. There's a higher risk that something's going to go wrong. But it is an important key thing to remember when you're going to have an investment property. So two of the other really big questions that I get asked all the time when it comes to Airbnb is, if you build a Airbnb, is it tax deductible in the same way it is tax deductible if you build an investment property? Now, this is something, I'm not an accountant, I can't answer these questions. You want to speak to your accountant about. But depending on the way you do an Airbnb, it may be tax deductible or it may not be tax deductible. Again, speak to your accountant about that in particular. The other one that we get all the time is, can you get finance from a bank for Airbnb? Again, a lot of this actually comes down to what is the type of Airbnb that you're doing, and is it already up and running? Is it something you're just starting now? Is it something that is, in a really obscure location? Is it in your backyard? Is it just a room in your house? There are so many different variables. So for this one, I would say get in touch with us. There's a link there to be able to book a call. I'd say you actually want to find out specifically for your circumstances, because that way then you'll have a really clear understanding of whether it's something you can get finance for or not, especially if that's something that you're going to be relying on. So some of the common dangers and pitfalls with Airbnbs is not necessarily always from the tenants themselves or the people, your guests that will stay at the property. They do also come from external factors as well. So let's say you purchase an apartment in Queensland, maybe on the Gold Coast, and you decide you want to turn that into an Airbnb. As part of the apartment complex, you'll need to have checked beforehand with the owner's corporation that you're actually allowed to have that property as a short-term rental. Because even though the property is yours and you've purchased it, the owner's corporation holds the right to be able to stop you from letting it out as a short-term rental. Again, something that you want to check before you purchase a property, and something you want to check no matter whether it's an apartment and it's the owner's corporation, or it's you building a granny flat at the back of your house, you want to make sure the council is going to allow you to have that granny flat at the back of your house as a short-term rental property. One of the other things is that if you decide to build a granny flat at the back of your house, you may then also want to check that a real estate agent will be able to rent it out via a standard investment property rental scheme if it isn't successful as an Airbnb. You want to know that you've got a backup plan. So again, it really is a case of just checking all of the different variables and all the external parties that may turn around and say, no, you can't do that. So to sum it up, for an Airbnb property, there is really great investment potential as long as you get it right. But to get it right, it really means that you're going to do a lot of research. You're going to have to check to make sure that all that risk mitigation is completed correctly, and that you need to stay up to date with any changes in regulation that actually happen that may mean that all of a sudden your Airbnb property can't continue to be an Airbnb property. But the flip side is, if you've done all of that research, there's going to be some really great demand for your particular property. Yeah, you can make a lot of money. If you've got more questions about Airbnb or investment properties, write them on in the comments. We would love to make more videos for you to be able to help you understand what can be a really complex area of property and investment. And always happy to answer any questions that you've got. Feel free to get in touch.